Delighted to welcome back to Property Tribe's Bill Irvine. And Bill, certainly in our books, is the foremost authority on universal credit and LHA in the UK. And Bill, lovely to see you again. And it's a good time to have a catch up with you, really, because we're coming out of lockdown now. The restrictions are starting to ease. And I think we're going to kind of see, I guess, the consequences of what's happened over the last year, because everything's kind of been put almost like in a holding pattern. And now restrictions are being eased. I think some of the problems that have been building up over the past year are going to start coming out of the woodwork. And that's certainly the case with universal credit, isn't it? When we spoke earlier, we were both very complimentary about how the DWP had handled all the massive avalanche of people applying for universal credit because of COVID lockdown issues. But one thing that you've been picking up on now is that landlords already with universal credit tenants have not been receiving the required levels of service.
What's happened because of the volume of claims increasing so dramatically over the last year, we went from 2.4 million to we're now over 6 million. So not surprisingly, DWP has had to make a lot of changes, some of which involve their staff working from home, as we discussed before. And all the things that they did to process the new claims, all we did at that point in time was applaud them for that. I think it was justified. But what we're now seeing, as you're suggesting, is we're now seeing the fallout from that. We have got landlords anxious to receive the money, and in many cases, they're not getting the money because some of the tenants, quite a large proportion of them, are receiving their benefit from DWP, the housing costs, and not handing it over as quick as they should. Now, there is a process called the alternative payment process that we've discussed before, where the landlord can have the money redirected to them. And in theory, it should be relatively straightforward because they use a number of what they call tier one factors that are indicators as to whether the money should go to the landlord, one of which is rent arrears, where they've got 2 months or more. But there's also other categories that come under the term vulnerabilities, where tenants have got maybe some learning difficulties, difficulty managing their money, maybe a track history in the past, have been evicted, been homeless, etc. If the landlord makes an application, then the payment should be made to them as long as they satisfy the criteria. But what we're finding is that when the landlord makes an application, the application, first of all, is not acknowledged. So they wait for a couple of weeks and nothing happens. So they start getting a bit anxious, understandably. You know, what's happening? My rent arrears are still going up. And they contact DWP, or they try and contact them invariably by phone. They use the 0800 number that DWP provides. But there is no facility within that for the landlord. It's really all designed for the tenant. And if the tenant doesn't cooperate or is avoiding the landlord, then without that tenant's consent, the landlord has no means of making that call and getting anything from that call, because DWP are very concerned about data protection, breaches, GDPR, etc. So the staff are like rabbits caught in the headlight. As soon as they know it's a landlord and not the claimant, then they'll do whatever they can, sometimes to get them off the phone by saying, look, we can't tell you anything. And there's other situations as well when the application is awarded, and the DWP is supposed to notify them, the landlord, when that's going to start, how much is that going to be, and that's not happening the way it should be happening, the routine way. So again, the landlord's in the dark, and the landlord's then sending letters or emails to the DWP, and all that's doing is adding to the already burgeoning workload of the DWP staff themselves. But the landlord needs to do something about it, and DWP is just not responding. I've become involved in a lot of these cases in an effort to try and escalate them to some of the directorate, and sometimes that works. Particularly in the past, that used to work in most cases, but now they're actually resisting that as well. So you've got this situation where the landlord makes their application, fills out all the details, gives them all the information they're asked for, and then just have to sit, wait, and see whether they're successful or not. And sometimes they find out about it 3-4 months down the line. And that's just not acceptable.
It really isn't acceptable, Bill. It seems to me that the DWP is almost impenetrable to landlords, and it's just completely unacceptable that there's no facility to assist landlords. There's been so much emphasis during COVID-19 lockdown and the pandemic about, tenants' issues and tenants' mental well-being. But what about landlords' mental well-being? Every single person has been affected in this pandemic in some shape or form. And we've just been discussing this on the Landlord Lens with the NRLA, that there are a lot of landlords who are really, really struggling due to not being able to evict non-paying tenants and other issues that are occurring, as the fallout of COVID-19 lockdown starts to, make itself known. I think we've just seen the tip of the iceberg so far. But Bill, you said that one thing that landlords can do is to come to somebody such as yourself who may have a way into the DWP, but even that doesn't really seem to be working. What is the answer to this? What can landlords do? I can imagine there's some landlords in very, very challenging circumstances financially who are hanging on, with their fingernails. That there must be some kind of way forwards for them to get the payment that's due to them.
Yeah, I mean, it should, as I said earlier on, be routine, this, because the system is actually there. I know some of my landlord clients helped to make the new online system, and that actually works well. It's what happens after that that's not actually working. As you quite rightly say, the landlord should be able to establish what's happening. This is public money, and it's actually designed to reduce or extinguish the rent liability, nothing else. But what it's been used in many cases is to prop up the finances of the tenant. And the purpose of the alternative payment arrangement scheme, as Parliament designed it, was to protect first and foremost the interest of the claimant and the family that they have actually got. But you're not protecting the interest of the claimant's family if you're allowing that claimant month on month to just get that money and misuse that money. All that's doing is putting that situation even worse. Anybody knows anything about trying to recover debt from somebody who's on benefits will know it's difficult at the best of times, but when you're actually allowing the debt to build up to sometimes £15,000 per claim, and that's per tenant. In London, it can easily go up to that. And I've had some cases of landlords where we've actually been pursuing these cases with the independent case examiner to try and get compensation, because in every case that I've pursued so far with the DWP, they've been found guilty of maladministration. So they haven't complied with the scheme that they created. And they're actually now sending a letter of apology out to the landlord, and that's it. Under the local government ombudsman scheme, under housing benefit, where landlords are recognised, they've got rights, they can go to an independent tribunal, they can write to a council that actually takes seriously the complaints process. And when they set a 10-day turnaround time, they try and comply with that. The DWP doesn't. They set a 15-day turnaround for a first stage complaint, and you're wasting your time, because you'll wait much longer than that, months, before in some cases you get response. And they know as well, if they impede and frustrate the landlord in the next stage, which is the second stage, until they get that second stage outcome, they can't refer the case any further to the independent case examiner or elsewhere. So the landlord is totally frustrated, particularly with these type of cases. There's also instances because of the ban on evictions or the difficulty pursuing evictions, of tenants playing on that. And what they're doing is, in some cases, they've found out if they cancel their claim one day, any APA that's been put in place to pay the money to the landlord is then stopped. And they then reclaim the following day. They lose no benefit entitlement in doing so, but they get the housing costs, and they're then able to then access that and again misuse it. There's some of them are actually creating their own ASTs, they're downloading them from the internet and actually putting in that the landlord is some fictitious company, some of which, like a letting agent one I dealt with recently, had been struck off about 2 years before. They put that in as their letting agent, and DWP actually paid the money. When I questioned them, they told me during COVID, they have this policy of trust and protect, which effectively means, if you ask them, we trust what the tenant tells us, not what the landlord tells us. So if the tenant says that I've changed my landlord or my letting agent, they will accept that without question. And because of that, more and more of these tenants are actually information from others. And in some cases are actually charging money to advise tenants how they can access their housing costs. And the DWP is well aware of this, because I've written to Neil Cowling, the Director General, and others about this issue repeatedly. There's no dedicated phone number for a landlord to phone. If he's got somebody that he feels has been abusive of the system. I had an email exchange yesterday with a landlord who has just sold his property, right? So the other incoming landlord is assuming liability for the tenant, is taking over the liability issue, has served the relative notices under the Landlord Act. So the outgoing landlord is wanting to advise the DWP that this has happened. And there's no means to do that. And they accept that. There is no email facility to actually do that. How do we do it? Well, the DWP's reaction so far has been tell the new landlord to make an APA request. But that's not really the issue. We've still to sort out the first things, and that's the transfer of liability from one landlord to another. And the outgoing landlord has an obligation to notify DWP. That's the ironical thing about it. But they are making no attempts to facilitate that.
Well, Bill, this is absolutely shocking. I'm going to stick my neck out here and say this is an actual national scandal, because it's taxpayers' money that is being abused here. Landlords are being put into very, very challenging financial circumstances. Tenants, a small minority of them are gaming the system. And a lot of tenants are likely to lose their accommodation when this all comes out in the wash down the line, as it will if it takes many, many months. So I think it's a massive wake-up call to the DWP to actually address this problem that you've highlighted. It's, I can understand during the early days of COVID, everybody was scrambling, just trying to keep everything together as best they could. Nobody had been through it before, I accept that, but it's very disappointing to see that a year later, this level of abuse of taxpayers' money is being allowed to carry on, and DWP seems fairly oblivious to it. So I don't know what to say, Bill. It's just shocking.
Well, I've been so accustomed to dealing with councils for many years, and there you've got a structure where the landlord, as I said earlier on, has got rights. They are what they call a person affected. They have a right to an independent tribunal. If they write to a chief executive in a council, that will be responded to. There is no accountability in the hierarchy sometimes in the DWP. In fact, Mr. Cowling complained to me a few weeks ago because I'd actually referred a case where a landlord had written to him twice before saying, look, I've applied 13 times for an APA. I've still to receive an acknowledgement from you, never mind a response. They hadn't got it, so they referred to me, and I wrote to Neil saying, could you get somebody to have a look at this case? Because obviously there's a tenant here who's misusing the money, and that's public money. There was also a statement from Amber Rudd, the ex-Secretary of State, only a year or so ago, where she was saying that they recognised that private landlords were getting shortchanged. They were not actually providing the service to them that they should have. And Mr. Cowling's response to me was, stop complaining directly to me. Use the process. Now, the process doesn't work, and that's why we're contacting them. But I mean, I've never came across, in all my years of doing this, I've never came across a situation where a chief exec would say to me, don't complain to me. They recognise that the buck stops with them, and they will ensure that somebody within their organisation will deal with the issue, and usually very quickly. But with DWP, if you want to actually go through the process of complaints, it's hard to believe, but the independent case examiner's email is ICE, independent case examiner at DWP, would you believe? They're supposed to be the independent, objective, observer, and that's the same email address. And if you actually make a referral to the independent case examiner, it takes 2 years to get an outcome. Well, what is the point of that?
It's bordering on farcical, Bill. It really is. Anybody suffering from this, all they can do is perhaps contact you and seek your assistance, or I think we should say contact Mr. Cowling. He's on Twitter, and get his attention. And if enough people bring it to his attention and bother him with it and take up his time to deal with it, then maybe some measures will be put in place to support landlords who are, also in difficult and challenging circumstances due to the COVID pandemic. But Bill, if we just move on now, because you've recently launched your new website, which is Universal Credit Academy, and you are running some online training events for landlords in the next few months. They're small groups of 10 to 12 people, which is how you feel it works best from your experience. We'll put the dates below this thread of where you can sign up to Bill's training days. But just, Bill, tell us why have you decided to do these training days, and what will the Academy be seeking to do?
Well, again, it's because of COVID. What I've found is that I'm doing 2 or 3 of these every week. And sometimes it's a one-to-one with a new landlord that's for the first time had a tenant who is claiming universal credit. So they need to know the basics of it. There's also more experienced landlords as well who are wanting to know more beyond how do I get payments made directly to us, because the scheme itself is actually quite complicated, and there are a variety of banana skins built into the system. If you don't know what you're doing, you can actually lose money both for you and for the tenant. And these are the areas that we tend to kind of focus on. It's not a new thing for me. I've been doing training with Institute Housing and a variety of others for many years, and with the RLA, and more recently with the NRLA. But the way I like to do things is try and keep a conversation like we're having today, rather than dealing with big groups where people listen in, but they don't actually get the opportunity to ask questions, or if they do, they'll be fortunate to get one question. So in the sessions we are doing, they are usually for 2 or 3 hours, these sessions, and we cover quite a lot of ground. And during that time, the landlords can ask as many questions as they like. So what we've done is we've structured it in such a way that we do a kind of introductory course for the kind of new landlords, letting agents. And there's actually quite a lot of letting agents have been in contact, and we've been doing these sessions because for them, some of them have never dealt with people on benefits, because their own landlords have said, look, we don't want to take people on benefits. We would rather have people who are working, because they saw them as less of a risk. But they're now realising, because of COVID, many of these low-risk tenants that they assumed are now having to claim benefits, at least for the short term, until the restrictions are lifted. And the other things we're trying to do as well is provide the landlords during these sessions with a number of templates. How do I respond to a complaint? How do I respond to a non-response from my APA request? And how do I help my tenants ask for requests for things like mandatory reconsiderations, and how do we do it for appeals and things like that? And we try to keep it as simple as possible. Really, it's just then a case of filling in the personal details of your tenant, but otherwise the majority of the narrative covers the requirements of appeals and mandatory reconsiderations. And the sessions have been going down well, the feedback's been great. So I thought we would specialise in the private landlord sector doing this, because most of my training I do is for social landlords, the big housing associations and councils. So this new website, it doesn't replace the main website. It's still UC advice and advocacy. But what it does is it focuses purely on the private sector. And hopefully it'll help people come along. The other thing we're trying to do as well is say to landlords, if there's 2 or 3 of you and you want to share a session, we don't have any difficulty with you doing that. We're charging for the session, as opposed to, in most cases, per delegate. Some of the courses will be per delegate, but most will have the opportunity to say to us, look, could we do this for 4 or 5 of us, and we'll split the cost? And that seemed to me a very reasonable way of doing it.
Well, that's absolutely awesome, Bill, that you are providing this much needed resource for landlords. And as I said, we will put the details of Bill's Universal Credit Academy below this video, and you can tap into Bill's immense knowledge of this sector, and you couldn't wish to have anybody better on your side than Bill. He is absolute ace at this topic. So Bill, thank you as always for everything that you do for the property community and sharing your knowledge here on Property Tribes with us and supporting Property Tribes. Always so much value in talking to you and hearing what's going on, and we hope to catch up with you again soon. But we want to wish you luck with the Academy, and I'm sure it's, you know, you're going to get a great outcome from that and a lot of interest in it. I think it's much needed by the sound of it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, and I hope the landlords and the letting agents take up the opportunity. If anybody wants to know anything about it, they want to have a chat about it, they can phone me as well beforehand. But thanks for your support as well. I much appreciate the help you've given me, Vanessa.
Thank you, Bill. Good luck, and we'll see you soon.
All right. Okay, all the best. Bye-bye.